Now let's begin. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marshall Houston watched Kelvin work the heavy bag. The kid had decent form for 17. Hips rotating properly, shoulders loose, fists tight. Not UFC material, but solid enough to handle himself. That was all Marshall wanted. In his line of work, knowing how to throw a punch wasn't about glory. It was about survival. "Keep your chin tucked," Marshall called out. "You're leaving yourself open." Kelvin adjusted, sweat dripping down his neck. The Houston Training Center sprawled across 12,000 square feet of repurposed warehouse space in Denver's industrial district. Marshall had bought it 8 years ago with money he'd saved from his time in the service. The kind of service that didn't appear on any official record. Black operations. 18 years of it. He'd done things in places that didn't exist for reasons that were never explained. And when he'd gotten out, he'd wanted something clean. Something honest. MMA training fit. No lies, no deception. Just technique, discipline, and pain you could see coming. "Dad, I'm thinking about asking Mom if I can stay here this weekend," Kelvin said, unwrapping his hands. "It's my birthday Saturday." Marshall grabbed 2 water bottles from the cooler. "You know you're always welcome. But your mom's probably planning something." "Yeah, that's what I'm worried about." Kelvin took a long drink. "Earl's family is coming over. His cousins. They're..." He trailed off. "They're what?" "Nothing. Just weird, you know? They make comments." Marshall's jaw tightened. Earl Durham. His ex-wife Linda had remarried 2 years ago to a real estate developer with money and connections. Marshall hadn't cared much. The divorce had been finalized 5 years back, relatively amicable given the circumstances. Linda had wanted stability. Marshall's nightmares and long silences hadn't provided that. Fair enough. But this Earl character rubbed him wrong. Too smooth. Too eager to play stepdad to a kid who didn't need replacing. "What kind of comments?" Kelvin shrugged. "Just guy stuff. About how I should bulk up more? Or learn to take a joke. I don't know. It's fine." It wasn't fine, but Marshall didn't push. The bell above the gym's entrance chimed. 3 fighters walked in. Andre Fowler, a welterweight with a record of 12-3. Pablo Schroeder, a heavyweight who'd just signed with a regional promotion. And Lewis McCann, Marshall's assistant coach and former Marine. All 3 had trained with Marshall for years. They trusted him because he'd earned it, one drill at a time. "Kelvin's looking sharp," Andre said, nodding at the kid. "You thinking about competing?" "Maybe. Dad says I should wait until college." "Smart," Lewis said. He was 42, built like a fire hydrant, with scar tissue around both eyes. Brain still developing. No rush. Marshall had seen too many young fighters burn out or get hurt chasing glory. Kelvin had potential, but he also had options. Good grades. A scholarship offer from UC Boulder. Marshall wouldn't let ambition destroy that. The afternoon passed in the usual rhythm. Drilling takedowns, working submissions, correcting form. Marshall moved between students, amateur fighters, weekend warriors, a few cops who wanted to stay sharp. He'd built a reputation. If you trained at Houston's, you learned to fight properly, or you didn't train at all. No egos allowed. No shortcuts. At 6, Kelvin grabbed his gym bag. "I'll text you about this weekend." "Do that." And Kelvin. The kid turned. "If those cousins give you trouble, you don't have to take it. You hear me?" Kelvin smiled. "I know, Dad. It's cool." He left. Marshall watched him go, that familiar knot forming in his stomach. The same instinct that had kept him alive in Kandahar and Damascus and a dozen other places without names. Something was wrong. He couldn't see it yet, but he could feel it. Lewis came over, wiping down equipment. "You worried about something?" "Always. That's the job." Marshall had known Lewis since his 3rd tour. They'd pulled security together in places where the rules didn't apply. When Marshall had left the service, Lewis had followed 2 years later. Some bonds you didn't break. "You ever regret getting out?" Marshall asked. Lewis considered it. "Some days. Then I remember all the reasons I wanted out in the first place." He paused. "Why? You having second thoughts?" "No. Just thinking. Dangerous habit." They locked up at 10. Marshall drove home to his apartment 15 minutes away, a modest 2-bedroom that overlooked the city. He'd never needed much. The walls held a few photos, Kelvin as a baby, Kelvin at his middle school graduation, Kelvin landing his first clean jab during training. No pictures of Marshall service days. Those memories didn't need photographs. His phone buzzed. A text from Kelvin, staying at mom's this weekend. She'll be mad if I bail. Love you. Marshall typed back, love you too. Call if you need anything. He didn't sleep well that night. Old habits. He'd wake every 2 hours, check the perimeter, listen for sounds that didn't belong. The therapist at the VA had called it hypervigilance. Marshall called it staying alive. Even now, 8 years removed from the field, he couldn't shut it off. Friday passed normally. Saturday morning, Marshall ran 5 miles, worked the bags for an hour, then opened the gym at 8. Andre, Pablo, and 4 other fighters came in for sparring sessions. They were preparing for a regional card in 3 weeks. Marshall watched them work, calling out adjustments, timing rounds. At 2:15, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Mr. Houston? A woman's voice, professional but strained. This is Denver General. Your son Kelvin was brought in about 20 minutes ago. You're listed as his emergency contact. The world narrowed. What happened? He has injuries. Multiple contusions, possible fractures. The police are here. You should come now. Marshall was moving before she finished. He grabbed his keys, shouted something to Lewis about closing up, and drove. 15 minutes to the hospital felt like 15 hours. His mind ran through scenarios, car accident, random assault, something worse. The operator had mentioned police. That meant a crime. He found Kelvin in the ER, behind a curtain in the trauma bay. The kid's face was unrecognizable. Both eyes swollen shut, lips split, nose clearly broken. His ribs were wrapped, and his right hand was in a temporary splint. 2 teeth missing. Blood in his hair. Marshall felt something cold settle in his chest. Not panic, not rage. Something older. Something he'd locked away when he'd left the service. Jesus Christ, he whispered. A doctor appeared. Young, exhausted, efficient. Mr. Houston? I'm Dr. Patel. Your son has 3 fractured ribs, a broken nose, multiple lacerations requiring stitches, and significant soft tissue damage. We're running scans to check for internal bleeding, but he's stable. Who did this? He said he was attacked. Multiple assailants. The police want to speak with you. A detective stood nearby, a middle-aged black woman with sharp eyes and a tired expression. Detective Rochelle Lowry, according to her badge. Mr. Houston, I'm sorry about your son. He told us 9 men attacked him near his mother's residence in Cherry Hills. He said they're his stepfather's cousins. Is that correct? I don't know. Where's his mother? We called her. She's on her way. Marshall looked at Kelvin. The kid was conscious barely. His eyes found Marshall's through the swelling. Dad, Kelvin whispered. Stepmom's cousins. They jumped me. 9 of them. A small nod. Even that looked painful. On your birthday. Another nod. The cold thing in Marshall's chest spread. He'd taught Kelvin how to fight, how to defend himself. But 9 men wasn't a fight. It was a beating. It was an execution that stopped short. Why? Marshall asked. Kelvin's voice was barely audible. Said I was disrespectful. Said I needed to learn my place. Marshall turned to Detective Lowry. You're arresting them? We're investigating. Your son can only identify 2 of them by name, Frederick Durham and Walter Durham. The others, he'd seen at family gatherings but doesn't know their full names. Without positive IDs, it's difficult to. They did this at his mother's house. Nearby, 2 blocks away, according to your son. Linda arrived 20 minutes later, Earl Durham trailing behind her. She looked horrified, rushing to Kelvin's side. Earl stayed back, his expression carefully neutral. He was 52, silver hair, expensive suit even on a Saturday. The kind of man who'd never thrown a punch in his life, but knew how to buy his way out of problems. Oh God, Kelvin, Linda sobbed. What happened? Your family happened, Marshall said quietly. Earl's eyes flickered. That's not fair. We don't know the full story. 9 men beat my son nearly to death. Your cousins. That's the full story. Look, Marshall, I understand you're upset, but let's not jump to conclusions. Marshall took a step toward him. Lewis appeared from nowhere, putting a hand on Marshall's shoulder. Marshall hadn't even heard him arrive. Easy, Lewis murmured. Detective Lowry cleared her throat. Mr. Durham, do you know the whereabouts of Frederick Durham and Walter Durham? They're family. I can reach out, but I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, Marshall repeated. He looked at Kelvin, broken and barely conscious. Then back at Earl. Your family put my son in the hospital on his birthday, and you're calling it a misunderstanding. Marshall, please, Linda said. Let the police handle it. He wanted to say so many things. He wanted to ask how she'd let this happen, how she'd married into a family that would do this to her son. But she was crying, and for all their history, he didn't want to hurt her more. So instead, he said nothing. He just pulled a chair next to Kelvin's bed and sat down. He'd stay as long as it took. And while he sat, that cold thing in his chest began to crystallize into something sharp and focused. He'd built a life on discipline and control, on walking away from violence. But some things you couldn't walk away from. Some things required a different kind of response. Marshall Houston had been out of the game for 8 years. But the game never really left you. It just waited. Kelvin spent 3 days in the hospital. Marshall never left. He slept in the chair beside the bed, ate from the cafeteria, and ignored the calls from the gym. Lewis handled operations. The fighters understood. He took care of family first. Detective Lowry came by twice more. She'd located Frederick and Walter Durham, brought them in for questioning. Both claimed Kelvin had started it, that they'd only defended themselves. Self-defense against a 17-year-old kid, 9 against 1. The story was absurd, but they'd lawyered up immediately. Without additional witnesses, and with Kelvin unable to identify the other 7 attackers clearly, the DA was hesitant to press charges. The system's working on it, Lowry said on the 3rd day. She didn't sound convinced. Marshall nodded. He didn't expect much from the system. The system was for people who followed rules. The Durham family had money and connections. They'd make this disappear. When Kelvin was released, Marshall drove him back to his apartment, not Linda's house. The kid didn't argue. He moved slowly, wincing with each breath. The bruises had deepened to purple and black. He looked like he'd gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight and lost everyone. I'm sorry, Dad. Kelvin said that first night. For what? For not being able to fight back. Marshall set down the ice pack he'd been preparing. You were outnumbered 9-1. There's no shame in survival. You would have found a way. Maybe. Or maybe I'd be dead. Marshall sat across from him. I fought when I had to, but I've also run when running was smarter. You stayed alive. That's what matters. Kelvin stared at his hands. One still splinted, the other bruised across the knuckles where he'd managed to land a few hits. They said I needed to learn respect. That I thought I was tough because my dad owns a gym. Frederick kept laughing. Said I was pathetic. There it was. The real reason. Not just a beating. A message. A humiliation designed to break the kid's spirit. Tell me everything, Marshall said. From the beginning. Kelvin took a shaky breath and started talking. It had started weeks ago. Small comments at family dinners. Frederick Durham, Earl's cousin, was 31, unemployed, living off a trust fund. Walter Durham, Frederick's brother, was 29, same situation. Earl had 7 cousins in total, all cut from similar cloth. Money they hadn't earned, time they didn't know how to fill, and a shared resentment toward anyone they perceived as weaker. They'd focused on Kelvin, mocked his training, his grades, his plans for college. Called him soft. Said real men didn't need school, didn't need to learn how to fight in a gym. When Kelvin had ignored them, it had only escalated. Last Saturday, I was walking to the store, Kelvin said. 2 blocks from Mom's house. Frederick and Walter pulled up in a Mercedes. Said they wanted to give me a birthday present. Then 6 more guys got out of another car behind them. I didn't even recognize most of them. One guy, I think his name was Toby. Another was maybe Calvin. But it all happened so fast. They'd surrounded him, taunted him, told him to fight back, to show them what Marshall Houston's son could do. When Kelvin had tried to walk away, Frederick had shoved him. Kelvin had shoved back. That had been the excuse they needed. 9 men. Fists, elbows, knees. They'd taken turns. Kelvin had covered up, tried to protect his head, but there were too many angles. When he'd gone down, they'd kicked him. When he tried to get up, they'd knocked him down again. It had lasted maybe 3 minutes. Then they'd left him bleeding on the sidewalk. Did anyone see it? Marshall asked. I don't know. It was a quiet street. Lots of big houses, big yards. If anyone saw, they didn't come out. Marshall stood, walked to the window. Denver's lights spread below. Somewhere out there, 9 men were going about their lives, laughing about what they'd done, feeling untouchable. He thought about the choices ahead. He could wait for the legal system, slow, uncertain, compromised by money and influence. He could file a civil suit, expensive, public, likely to end in a settlement that meant nothing. Or he could handle it himself, the way he'd been trained, the way he'd operated for 18 years in places where justice was whatever you could enforce. Get some rest, Marshall said. I'll be here. Kelvin limped to the guest bedroom. Marshall waited until he heard the door close, then pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, past the fighters and students and business connections, down to a section he rarely accessed. Names from another life. People who understood a different kind of work. He dialed. The call connected on the second ring. Houston, a voice said. Didn't expect to hear from you. I need information, Marshall said. Names, addresses, routines. 9 targets. I'll send details. This official. Personal. A pause. You know what you're doing? I train the people who train UFC fighters, Marshall said. I think I can handle some trust fund kids. I meant legally. Marshall smiled without humor. There's always legal risk. But some things are worth it. He ended the call and stared out at the city. Tomorrow, he'd open the gym like normal. He'd work with his fighters, refine their techniques, prepare them for their upcoming matches. And while he did that, he'd begin preparing something else. A lesson. The kind you didn't learn in a courtroom. The kind that left permanent scars. Monday morning came cold and gray. Marshall was at the gym by 6, running inventory, checking equipment, answering emails. He moved through the routine on autopilot, his mind elsewhere. Kelvin was back at the apartment, healing. Linda had called 4 times. Marshall had ignored her. He didn't want to hear apologies or excuses. He wanted names. His contact, a guy named Jonathan Frost who had worked intelligence during Marshall's service days, sent the file at 7. 9 names, complete with addresses, employment information, social media profiles, and daily routines. The Durham cousins weren't subtle. They documented everything online. Parties, trips, cars, watches. A lifestyle funded by family money and protected by family lawyers. Frederick Durham, 31, lived in a condo in Lodo, drove a Mercedes S-Class, frequented upscale bars and clubs. No real job. Officially listed as a consultant for one of Earl's real estate ventures. Walter Durham, 29, shared a house in Capitol Hill with Toby Draper, 27, another cousin. Both unemployed, both living off inheritance. The other 6 range from 25 to 33. Calvin Murphy, Howard Craig, George Holmes, Marcos Donovan, Samuel Ritter, Rick Clay. All cousins or extended family. All connected to Earl's money. All present at the beating. Marshall studied their photos. They had the same entitled smugness. The same assumption that actions didn't have consequences. Frederick especially. His social media was full of gym selfies where he flexed without definition, posed with bottles and clubs, made jokes about teaching lessons. One post from 3 days ago showed him at a restaurant with Walter and Toby, champagne glasses raised. The caption, another good weekend. Family first. Family first. Marshall memorized the phrase. At 8, the gym started filling up. Andre arrived first, then Pablo, then a dozen others. Lewis came in at 9, took one look at Marshall, and pulled him aside. You've got that look, Lewis said. What look? The Kandahar look. The I'm planning something that'll end badly look. Marshall didn't deny it. My son's in pieces. The cops can't do anything. The DA won't file charges. The family's already circling wagons. So you're going to do what? Haven't decided yet. Bull. You decided the minute you saw Kelvin in that hospital bed. Lewis crossed his arms. I'm not saying don't. I'm saying be smart. I'm always smart. You're always efficient. Smart would be staying out of it. Marshall turned to watch the gym. Andre was working with a new student, showing proper stance. Pablo was hitting mitts with another fighter, the rhythm steady and precise. These men trusted him. They'd followed his guidance because he'd always been honest, disciplined, focused. But discipline had limits. And sometimes honesty meant admitting what needed to be done. If I asked for help, Marshall said quietly, would I get it? Lewis was silent for a long moment. Then what kind of help? The kind you don't ask questions about. These the guys who hurt Kelvin. 9 of them. Jumped him on his birthday. Lewis's jaw tightened. He'd met Kelvin dozens of times, watched the kid grow up in the gym. 9-on-1. Real tough guys. That's what I thought. What are you planning? Marshall looked at him. I want to call a meeting. All the fighters. See who's interested in some extracurricular sparring. Understanding dawned in Lewis's eyes. Sparring. Yeah, you know how it is. Sometimes amateurs want to test themselves against real fighters. Sometimes those tests get educational. And if someone gets hurt, random street attacks happen all the time, Marshall said. Denver's a big city. Dangerous if you're not careful. Lewis studied him. Former Marine to former Black Ops. They'd seen enough combat to know how things worked when the official rules didn't apply. Sometimes justice was clean and legal. Sometimes it was messy and necessary. How many fighters you thinking? However many want in. But I need this done right. No obvious connections. No patterns. Just accidents. Unfortunate encounters with people who know how to hurt someone without killing them. Lewis nodded slowly. I'll put out feelers. Quiet. These guys are all loyal to you, but some might have problems with. I'm not asking anyone to do anything they're not comfortable with, Marshall said. This is volunteer only, and I'll take full responsibility if anything goes wrong. You really think you can protect everyone if this blows back? Marshall smiled. I was in Black Ops for 18 years. I've handled worse problems with fewer resources. That afternoon, Lewis pulled aside Andre, Pablo, and 3 other fighters. Willard Haas, a middleweight with a mean streak. Kenneth Greer, a former Army Ranger turned MMA coach. And Lorenzo McGrath, a heavyweight who'd done 2 tours in Iraq. All men Marshall trusted. All men who understood violence as a tool, not a sport. They met in Marshall's office after hours. Marshall laid it out plainly. His son had been beaten by 9 men. The law wasn't helping. He wanted to return the favor, but cleanly. No murders. No permanent damage. Just enough pain to teach a lesson that would last. I'm not ordering anyone to help, Marshall said. But if you're interested, I have names and schedules. We do this smart, different locations, different times, no connections between incidents. Make it look random. Andre spoke first. Your kid's a good kid. What happened to him was chicken shit. Agreed, Pablo said. But we do this, we're taking serious risks. Legal risks. I know. That's why I'm asking, not telling. Willard leaned forward. These trust fund assholes think they can do whatever they want because they've got money. I'm in. Kenneth nodded. I've got a daughter Kelvin's age. Someone did that to her. I'd do worse than this. Count me in. Lorenzo, what's the play? Marshall pulled out the file. 9 faces. 9 names. 9 targets. We rotate. Different fighter for each target. You pick your moment, parking lot, alley, wherever they feel safe. You engage briefly, do enough damage to send them to the ER, then disappear. No phones, no cameras, no witnesses. You wear gloves, keep your face covered, move fast. What if they fight back? Andre asked. Marshall almost laughed. They won't. These aren't fighters. They're predators who attack in packs. Alone, they're nothing. What about their family? Pablo asked. Earl Durham's connected. He'll make noise. Let him. He can't prove anything if we're careful. And even if he suspects, what's he going to say? That someone beat up his cousins after they beat up my son? That's not a conversation he wants public. Lewis, leaning against the wall, added, we need more than 5 guys for 9 targets. Spread the risk. Marshall nodded. I'll talk to others. But carefully. Only people we trust. Over the next 2 days, Marshall approached more fighters. Some declined. They had families, criminal records, or just didn't want the exposure. Marshall respected that. But 24 men volunteered. 24 fighters who'd trained under him, who'd learned discipline and technique, who understood that sometimes the ring wasn't where the real fights happened. 24 against 9. Fair odds, Marshall thought. He divided them into groups, assigned each group a target. He provided photos, addresses, schedules. He emphasized rules. No weapons, no excessive force, no witnesses. Get in, deliver the beating, get out. Make it hurt, but don't kill. This was about justice, not murder. One more thing. Marshall said at the final meeting, if any of you get caught, I take full responsibility. You say I hired you, threatened you, whatever works. I've got the resources to handle legal trouble. Most of you don't. Understood. They understood. Wednesday night it started. Frederick Durham left a club in Lodo at midnight, drunk and alone. Andre and Willard followed him to the parking garage. No cameras in that section. Andre had checked. Frederick was fumbling with his keys when they approached. Hey, buddy, you got the time? Andre asked. Frederick turned, annoyed. Get your own. Willard hit him first, a clean right hook to the jaw. Frederick went down. Andre followed with kicks to the ribs, precise and measured. 3 ribs broken, just like Kelvin. Willard added a few punches to the face for good measure. 30 seconds total. They left Frederick unconscious next to his Mercedes and disappeared into the night. Thursday night, Walter Durham. He was leaving a restaurant with Toby Draper when Pablo and Kenneth intercepted them in the parking lot. 2-on-2, but Pablo and Kenneth were professionals. Walter lasted 10 seconds before he was on the ground. Toby managed to throw a wild punch before Kenneth put him down with a body shot that fractured his sternum. Both men ended up in the hospital. Random street attack, they told the police. Didn't see the faces. Friday night, Calvin Murphy. He was jogging in Cheeseman Park, late evening, trying to stay in shape. Lorenzo and 2 other fighters met him on a secluded trail. Calvin tried to run. They caught him easily. Lorenzo, who weighed 260 and benched 400 pounds, delivered a beating that left Calvin with a broken nose, shattered jaw, and enough internal bruising to keep him hospitalized for a week. Saturday, Howard Craig and George Holmes, both at a house party in Capitol Hill. They left together at 2 a.m., walked to Howard's car. For fighters were waiting. The beating was quick and brutal. Both men hospitalized. Sunday, Marcos Donovan. Gym parking lot, broad daylight. Marshall had sent 3 younger fighters, guys in their early 20s who could pass for random thugs. Marcos was leaving his overpriced fitness center when they surrounded him. He tried to talk his way out. They weren't interested in conversation. Marcos ended up with a concussion and broken ribs. Monday, Samuel Ritter. He was harder to catch, security guard at one of Earl's properties. But Kenneth, former ranger, knew how to set up an ambush. Caught Samuel on his way home, dark street, no witnesses. Samuel fought back harder than the others, managed to land a few hits. Didn't matter. Kenneth broke his arm and left him crawling. Tuesday, Rick Clay. The last one. Marshall saved him for a special crew. Andre, Pablo, Willard, and Lewis. For professionals. Rick was having dinner at an expensive restaurant downtown. They waited until he was walking to his car. The beating lasted longer than the others. Not because it needed to, but because Marshall wanted Rick to remember every second. Rick Clay ended up in intensive care. Broken jaw, shattered orbital bone, punctured lung, internal bleeding. He'd survive, but he'd never look the same. 9 men, all in the emergency room within 6 days. All claiming random attacks. All unable to identify their attackers. The police noticed the pattern. Detective Lowry came to the gym on Wednesday, a week after it started. Mr. Houston, I'd like to ask you some questions. Marshall was working with a student on guillotine chokes. He finished the demonstration, then walked over. Detective, what can I do for you? 9 men connected to your ex-wife's husband have been assaulted in the past week. All seriously injured. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? I heard. Seems like Denver's getting dangerous. Seems convenient. Your son gets beaten, then all 9 suspects end up in the hospital. Suspects? I thought the day wasn't pressing charges. Lowry's eyes hardened. You know what I mean. Marshall met her gaze calmly. Detective, I've been here every day running my gym. I've got cameras, timestamps, witnesses. I haven't left the city. Haven't been anywhere near those men. What about your fighters? What about them? 24 men train here regularly. All of them capable of serious violence. You want me to believe that's a coincidence? I train fighters. That's what I do. What they do in their free time isn't my responsibility. Mr. Houston, Marshall, I understand you're angry. I have kids. If someone did to them what was done to Kelvin, I'd want justice too. But this isn't justice. This is vigilante violence. Is it? Marshall crossed his arms. Or is it just a series of unfortunate incidents? Crimes happen. Sometimes bad people have bad luck. 9 incidents in 6 days isn't luck. It's coordination. Then investigate. Check alibis. Review footage. You'll find I've been here, working every single day. And if some of my fighters happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, well, that's between them and the law. Lowry stared at him. You're not going to give me anything, are you? There's nothing to give. I'm a business owner. I run a legitimate training facility. If crimes were committed, that's your department. She left frustrated. Marshall went back to work. That evening, Lewis pulled him aside. You know, she's not going to let this go. Doesn't matter. She can't prove anything. No witnesses, no camera footage, no physical evidence. Just a string of unrelated assaults. Until one of the guys talks. They won't. They're loyal. And even if they do, I'll take the fall. That was always the plan. Lewis shook his head. You're playing a dangerous game. I played dangerous games for 18 years. This is nothing. But that night, Marshall got a call that changed the equation. Earl Durham's lawyer. Mr. Houston, my name is George Delgado. I represent Earl Durham and his family. I think we should meet. I don't think we have anything to discuss. I think we do. My clients are willing to drop any potential legal action regarding the recent incidents if you agree to certain terms. Marshall's interest sharpened. What terms? A mutual agreement to move forward. No police involvement, no lawsuits, no further conflict. You keep your son away from the Durham family, and they'll keep away from him. Everyone moves on. After they put my son in the hospital, after an unfortunate altercation that has now been balanced, my clients have suffered significant harm. They're willing to consider that sufficient resolution. Marshall smiled in the darkness of his apartment. They want a truce. They want peace. As do you, I'm sure. Unless you'd prefer Detective Lowry to continue her investigation. The threat was clear. If Marshall declined, the Durham family would push for a criminal investigation. They'd use their connections, their money, their influence to prove what Marshall had done. It might not work, but it would be expensive, time-consuming, and risky. On the other hand, if he accepted, everyone walked away. The Durham cousins learned their lesson. Kelvin was safe, and Marshall avoided legal consequences. It was a smart move. Earl Durham might be smug, but he wasn't stupid. He knew his family had started this. He also knew they'd lost. Now he wanted to save face and avoid further damage. Tell Earl I'll consider it, Marshall said. But I want a written agreement, signed by all 9 of those men, admitting they attacked my son, agreeing to stay away from him and my family permanently. Non-disclosure clause, they don't talk about what happened to them. Ever. That's a significant request. It's non-negotiable. They admit guilt, even if it's just on paper, or I don't agree to anything. And if even one of them comes near my son again, the truce is off. Delgado was quiet for a moment. I'll discuss it with my clients. The call ended. Marshall sat in the dark, thinking. This was the end game. The Durham family was broken, humiliated, and desperate to make it stop. They'd never admit publicly what happened, but a private admission was enough. It would protect Kelvin legally and emotionally, and it would give Marshall leverage if they ever tried anything again. 3 days later, Delgado called back. My clients have agreed to your terms. The meeting happened in a law office downtown. Earl Durham was there, looking older and more tired than Marshall remembered. Frederick and Walter, both still bruised and bandaged, sat with their lawyer. The other 7 cousins had signed affidavits, but weren't present, too injured or too afraid. The document was straightforward. An admission that they had assaulted Kelvin Houston without provocation, an agreement to avoid all contact with Kelvin and Marshall, and a non-disclosure agreement regarding all related events. In exchange, Marshall would not pursue civil or criminal charges and would discourage any further incidents. Frederick signed with his left hand. His right was in a cast. Walter's signature was shaky. Both men looked at Marshall with hate, but also fear. They'd learned what happened when you attacked someone connected to a man who knew how to fight back. Earl signed last. He met Marshall's eyes. I hope you're satisfied. I'm satisfied my son is safe. Are you satisfied with the family you've built? Earl looked away. Marshall took the signed documents, shook Delgado's hand, professional courtesy, and left. He drove straight to the gym, made copies of the agreement, and filed them in 3 separate locations. Insurance. That night, he went home to find Kelvin sitting on the couch, flipping through college brochures. The bruises had faded to yellow and green. The swelling was gone. His ribs still hurt, but he could move without wincing. Dad, did you? Kelvin trailed off. Did I what? I heard on the news. All those guys, they got hurt. Frederick, Walter, all of them. Marshall sat down. Bad luck. Denver's a dangerous city. Kelvin stared at him. Dad. Kelvin. The kid's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but something else. Relief. Vindication. The knowledge that he wasn't alone, that someone had stood up for him when the system wouldn't. Thank you, Kelvin whispered. Marshall pulled his son into a careful hug, mindful of the healing ribs. You don't have to thank me. That's what family does. We protect each other. Mom's been calling. She wants to apologize. You could talk to her when you're ready. She's still your mom, but you don't owe her anything beyond that. Kelvin nodded against Marshall's shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, father and son, survivors of different battles, but united by the same understanding. Sometimes the world was fair, and sometimes you had to make it fair yourself. 2 weeks later, Detective Lowry came by the gym one last time. Marshall was working with Andre on defensive combinations. She waited until they finished, then approached. Mr. Houston, I wanted to let you know the investigation into the assaults has been closed. Insufficient evidence. No witnesses, no leads, no connections we can prove. That's unfortunate, Marshall said. Is it? She studied him. The Durham family dropped all complaints. Earl Durham's lawyer sent a letter stating they don't wish to pursue the matter further. Interesting timing. People change their minds, or they realize they're outmatched. She paused. I can't prove you did anything, but I know you did. And you know I know. Marshall met her eyes. If I had done something, hypothetically, would that bother you? Legally? Yes. Personally, she glanced around the gym at the fighters, the equipment, the discipline Marshall had built. Those 9 men beat a kid 9-1 on his birthday. If someone taught them a lesson, I can't say I'm heartbroken. Hypothetically, she handed him a card. If you ever need anything official, call me. You're a good father, Marshall. But be careful. You got away with it this time. Next time, you might not. There won't be a next time, Marshall said. This was educational. For everyone involved. She smiled slightly. I bet it was. After she left, Lewis came over. Think she'll keep digging? No. She's closed the file, and the family isn't pushing. We're clear. So it's over. Marshall looked out at the gym, at his fighters working and learning and growing stronger. Yeah, it's over. But he knew better. It was never really over. Violence had a way of echoing. The Durham cousins would carry their injuries and their fear for years. Earl's marriage to Linda was probably damaged beyond repair. Marshall had heard they were separated. Kelvin would remember what happened, good and bad. It would shape the man he'd become. And Marshall would remember too. The cold calculation, the planning, the satisfaction of watching justice delivered by fists instead of gavels. He'd left Black Ops to escape that part himself, but it had never really left. It had just been waiting. The question was whether he could control it, or whether it would control him. For now, though, his son was safe. His gym was thriving. And 9 men who'd thought they were untouchable had learned a hard lesson about consequences. That would have to be enough. 3 months passed. Kelvin healed completely, accepted his scholarship to UC Boulder, and started training again. Not for competition. He decided that wasn't his path, but for fitness and self-defense. The fear from the attack had faded, replaced by confidence. He'd survived the worst and come out stronger. Marshall's gym gained a reputation. Word spread quietly through the MMA community about what had happened. Fighters respected loyalty. They respected a man who protected his family. New students signed up. The gym expanded. Andre got signed to a bigger promotion. Pablo won his next 3 fights. Lewis took over more coaching duties, which let Marshall focus on the business side. Everything was moving forward. Then, on a Tuesday in late spring, Linda came to the gym. Marshall was working the speed bag when he saw her enter. She looked nervous, out of place among the fighters and equipment. He finished his round, then walked over. Linda, hi, Marshall. Can we talk? They went to his office. She sat carefully, hands clasped. I wanted to thank you for taking care of Kelvin. For everything. He's my son. I know. And I'm sorry. I should have seen what Earl's family was like. I should have protected him. You can't change the past. No, but I can change the future. She took a breath. I'm divorcing Earl. The marriage is over. What happened to Kelvin and what happened after? I can't be part of that family. Marshall nodded. That's your choice. I know you'll never forgive me, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to do better. Kelvin's living with you now, but I'd like to be in his life. If he'll let me. Talk to him. He's old enough to decide. She stood, looking around the office. Photos of fighters, championship belts, certificates of training. You built something good here. Kelvin's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have him. After she left, Marshall sat at his desk and thought about the past months. The attack, the revenge, the aftermath. It had all happened so fast, driven by instinct and rage, and that cold, operational part of his mind that never truly rested. Had been worth it? Legally, he'd gotten away with something that could have landed him in prison. Morally, he'd crossed lines that most people never approached. But Kelvin was safe. The men who'd hurt him had paid. The system that had failed them had been bypassed. Sometimes justice was clean. Sometimes it was messy. Marshall had seen both versions in his career, and he'd learned that the world didn't always reward the righteous. It rewarded the strong, the smart, and the willing to act. His phone buzzed. A text from Kelvin. Hey Dad, finished my essay for school. Want to read it? Marshall smiled. Send it over. The essay came through a minute later. Title, What I Learned About Justice. Marshall read it slowly. Kelvin wrote about the attack, the aftermath, and the realization that sometimes the system failed. But he also wrote about his father's gym, the discipline he'd learned, and the importance of standing up for what was right. He didn't mention the revenge. He was smart enough to avoid that, but the subtext was clear. He understood what Marshall had done, and he was grateful. The essay ended with a quote. Justice isn't always found in courtrooms. Sometimes it's found in the people who care enough to fight for it. Marshall saved the file, then called Kelvin. Good essay. You'll get an A. Thanks. Dad, I've been thinking. After college, maybe I could come back and help run the gym. Learn the business side. Carry it forward. You sure? You got other options. I'm sure. You built something that matters. I want to be part of it. Marshall felt something warm in his chest. Not the cold calculation of revenge, but genuine pride. His son had been broken and had rebuilt himself stronger. And now he wanted to build something together. I'd like that, Marshall said. Love you, Dad. Love you too, kid. After the call, Marshall went back to the gym floor. Andre was teaching a new student. Pablo was working the heavy bag. Lewis was demonstrating a triangle choke. Everything was normal. Everything was as it should be. Marshall Houston had been a lot of things. A soldier, an operative, a fighter, a father. He'd killed and he'd saved. He'd followed orders and he'd made his own justice. And through it all, he learned one simple truth. The world was complicated, morality was messy, but family was absolute. You protected what mattered, no matter the cost. That was the only rule that counted. And as Marshall watched his fighters train, pushing themselves to be stronger, faster, better, he knew he'd followed that rule. He'd done what needed doing, and he'd do it again if he had to. Because that's what fathers do. They protect, they provide, and when all else fails, they fight. Marshall Houston had fought, and he'd won. That was enough.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.